A cold mist clings to the Scandinavian earth, shrouding ancient hills that are far more than they seem. These Viking burial mounds are silent time capsules, holding secrets locked away for over 1,000 years. Within them, archaeologists have uncovered a world far stranger and more complex than the simple raider stereotype. We are about to explore 50 of the most bizarre findings ever pulled from these graves, discoveries that will fundamentally challenge what you thought you knew about Norse culture and beliefs. You will hear tales of ships filled with exotic treasures, warriors who defy ancient gender roles, and artifacts that hint at lost rituals. Why was a powerful woman buried in a grand ship with a mysterious companion? What does a tiny statue of Buddha reveal about the vast reach of Viking traders? By the end of this journey, you will see the Viking Age in a completely new light. What do you believe is the most enduring mystery of the ancient world? The ground near Oseberg, Norway, gave up one of its greatest secrets in the early 20th century. Workers excavating a massive mound uncovered the ghost of a ship, its oak hull perfectly preserved in the blue clay. This was the Oseberg ship, a breathtaking vessel meant not for the open sea, but for a final, majestic journey into the afterlife. When archaeologists carefully cleared the burial chamber, they found not one, but two women lying side by side. One was in her early 30s, likely a queen of significant power and status. Yet it was her companion who ignited a mystery that still burns today. The second woman was around 80 years old, a remarkable age for the Viking Age, and her identity is a puzzle wrapped in an enigma. Why was this elderly woman given such an unparalleled honor? Some scholars believe she was a Volva, a seeress and master of magic. Her remains were found with a staff, a powerful symbol of prophecy and spiritual authority. Could the younger queen have been buried with her trusted guide, a woman who could navigate the realms of the gods as skillfully as any sailor navigated the seas? Other theories suggest she was the true Queen Mother, the power behind the throne whose wisdom was so revered she was granted this final voyage. The sheer wealth of their grave goods, from ornate wooden carts to elaborately carved animal heads, suggests they were figures of immense importance. But the bones of the older woman tell another story. They reveal signs of a long, debilitating illness, one that would have required constant care. Was she buried with her caretaker, or was the younger woman the one who needed her guidance, even in death? The Oseberg ship presents us with a profound duality, a powerful partnership that challenges our understanding of leadership, spirituality, and the bonds that connected people in the Viking world. The spiritual authority of the Oseberg women presents one kind of power, but a grave in the bustling trading center of Birka revealed another, a power that shattered modern assumptions. For over a century, archaeologists were certain they knew who lay in this particular burial mound, a high-status warrior surrounded by an arsenal of weapons. The grave was filled with a sword, an axe, spears, arrows, and the strategic game pieces of a military leader, all pointing to a life of command and battle. Everyone simply referred to the skeleton as a man, a chieftain. Then, advanced DNA analysis was applied to the ancient bones, and the results sent shockwaves through the world of archaeology. The warrior was genetically female. This was not merely a woman with a knife for protection. This was a professional warrior buried with the full honors of a military tactician. The discovery forced a dramatic rethinking of everything we thought we knew about Viking gender roles. The old sagas did speak of shield maidens, fierce women who fought alongside men, but many historians had dismissed these tales as mere legend, mythological figures rather than historical reality. The Birka warrior, known today as BJ 581, is the first confirmed high-ranking female Viking warrior ever discovered. She proves that these legendary women were not just fiction. The debate ignited by her bones is far from settled. Some scholars suggest she could have been a military leader whose strategic mind was honored, even if she did not personally fight in every battle. Others argue that the sheer completeness of her warrior's kit, including the horses prepared for her journey to the afterlife, leaves little doubt about her role on the battlefield. How common was her situation? Was she a remarkable exception, or does her existence hint at a more complex and fluid understanding of gender and capability in the Viking world? Her grave stands as a silent, powerful challenge, forcing us to look past our own cultural biases and see the past in a new, more nuanced light. What other long-held truths about ancient societies might be waiting for the right technology to reveal their secrets? The discovery of a female warrior in Birka shows us the power an individual could hold, but another grave reveals the brutal reality many Vikings faced far from home. Near the English coast at Weymouth, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave that tells a very different story, one not of honor but of execution. It was not a formal burial mound but a pit, and inside were the skeletons of 54 young men. Forensic analysis confirmed they were Scandinavians, likely a Viking raiding party. The story told by their bones is stark and horrifying. Each one had been beheaded. The placement of the cut marks on their vertebrae indicates they were forced to their knees, and the blows were delivered from the front, likely with a heavy sword. This was a public, systematic killing. The efficiency of the wounds suggests the executioners were experienced, perhaps soldiers of an Anglo-Saxon army. These Vikings were not given a journey to the afterlife with their weapons and treasures. They were disposed of as enemies, their bodies dumped unceremoniously into a ditch. This pit is a chilling testament to the intense and bloody conflict between the invading Norse and the defending Anglo-Saxons. It was not just a clash of cultures, but a fight for land and survival. The men in the Weymouth grave were not the successful, wealthy traders or raiders of legend. They were the ones who failed, their ambitions ending in a field on a foreign shore. Their decapitated skulls were tossed in with their bodies, a final, grim message about the price of defeat. This mass grave forces us to confront the raw violence of the age, a stark contrast to the dignified ship burials of the elite. It reminds us that for every successful voyage, there were countless others that ended in disaster. What became of the rest of their crew, and who exactly was powerful enough to capture and execute so many seasoned warriors at once? On a remote Scottish beach, a storm eroded a sandbank and revealed a treasure far stranger than gold. Hidden within a small, drystone chamber were 93 chess pieces, each a masterpiece of miniature sculpture carved from walrus ivory and whale tooth. These were the Lewis chessmen, their faces frozen in expressions of grim determination, comic surprise, and royal authority. The hoard contained not only kings and queens but also berserkers, those legendary warriors shown biting their shields in battle fury. The craftsmanship was unmistakably Norse, likely from a workshop in the Norwegian trading city of Trondheim in the 12th century. But this discovery creates more questions than it answers. Why were these exquisite pieces, a full set for multiple chessboards, hidden away on the Isle of Lewis? They were clearly objects of immense value, the possession of someone of great wealth, perhaps a merchant prince or a traveling noble. One compelling theory suggests they were the stock of a trader, buried for safekeeping during a moment of sudden peril. A storm may have threatened his ship, or a conflict may have forced him to stash his most precious cargo, intending to return for it later. For reasons lost to time, he never did. Another, more tantalizing idea is that they belonged to a bishop or clergyman, as chess was a popular pastime among medieval clerics. The Isle of Lewis was part of the Norse Kingdom of the Isles at the time, a crossroads of cultures and trade routes. Whoever owned them was a person connected to a vast network of commerce, from the Arctic sources of walrus ivory to the courts of Scandinavia and beyond. The chessmen are more than just game pieces. They are a snapshot of a connected world where art, leisure, and wealth traveled across the sea. Looking at their intricate, almost whimsical faces, you cannot help but wonder about the last person who held them. Did they hastily wrap these figures in cloth and seal them in the stone chamber, glancing over their shoulder with a heart full of fear? Or was their concealation a more deliberate act, a secret that was meant to be kept forever? The truth is buried with the original owner, leaving behind only these silent ivory witnesses to a drama we can only piece together. Deep within a burial mound in Mammen, Denmark, an iron axe head lay for centuries, its surface transformed into a canvas of breathtaking artistry. This was no ordinary weapon of war. The entire head is inlaid with intricate patterns of silver wire, creating a swirling, complex design known as the Mammen style. At its heart is a great bird-like creature, its body woven from tendrils and fierce energy. Scholars have debated its identity for generations. Is this the pagan rooster Gullinkambi who will crow at the dawn of Ragnarok, or is it the Christian phoenix reborn from its own ashes? The axe itself embodies this very question, a perfect symbol of a world in spiritual flux. It was found in the grave of a powerful man, buried with both this magnificent pagan-inspired axe and a large wax candle, a distinctly Christian item. This single burial presents a man balanced between two worlds, refusing to choose one set of beliefs over the other. He was likely a chieftain or a lord who understood that power often resides in embracing change, not resisting it. The axe was a statement, a declaration of wealth and sophisticated taste that would have been recognized by anyone who saw it. The technique of inlaying precious metal into iron is incredibly difficult, requiring a master smith. The result is a weapon that catches the light in a dazzling display, each silver line speaking of status and spiritual allegiance that was perhaps deliberately ambiguous. Was its owner a pagan hedging his bets, a Christian who still appreciated the old aesthetics, or something else entirely? The Mammen axe does not give us easy answers. Instead, it reveals a time of profound personal and cultural transformation, where the old gods and the new faith coexisted in the mind of one man, forever captured in the shimmering silver of his most prized possession. While the Mammen axe revealed a world of spiritual ambiguity, another grave in Sweden showcases the undeniable power and theatricality of a warrior elite. In the rich boat graves of Valsgärd, one helmet stands apart from all others. It is not the horned fantasy of popular myth, but something far more real and imposing. This iron helmet, worn by a chieftain laid to rest in his ship, features a grim and unforgettable face. Its most striking elements are the solid metal guards that sweep down over the eyes, giving the wearer the appearance of a predatory bird or a relentless specter. These were not mere decoration. In the chaos of a shield wall, this helmet would have transformed its owner into a terrifying figure, his eyes gleaming from the shadows of the metal guards, his identity completely obscured by a mask of iron. The entire helmet is a masterpiece of the metalsmith's art, adorned with pressblech foils depicting warriors and scenes of power, all detailed with bronze and shimmering silver. This was not just protective gear, it was a crown, a psychological weapon, and a sacred object all in one. The Valsgärd helmet predates the more famous Vendel period finds, placing its owner at the very dawn of this aristocratic warrior culture. He was not just a fighter, he was a performer in the theater of war and status. The elaborate boat burial itself, complete with sacrificed animals and feasting gear, tells us he was a leader whose community invested immense wealth in his journey to the afterlife. His helmet was the central prop in his performance of power, designed to inspire loyalty in his followers and sheer dread in his enemies. What must it have been like to face a line of such warriors, their faces hidden behind masks of metal, their intentions as inscrutable as the gods they worship? This one artifact speaks volumes about an era where leadership was as much about spectacle as it was about strength. The grim spectacle of a warrior's helmet gives way to a discovery that strips away all symbolism, revealing a brutal ritual reality. On the Isle of Man, a grassy mound at Ballater held a chilling tableau of power and its ultimate price. Archaeologists excavating the site uncovered a high-status individual, likely a chieftain, laid to rest with all the traditional grave goods befitting their rank. But the story did not end there. Directly on top of this person's body, the excavators found the remains of a young woman. She had not died of natural causes. Her skull had been violently crushed, and forensic analysis confirmed she was killed by a devastating blow to the head, a clear act of sacrificial violence. She was placed in the grave as a final offering, a human gift to accompany the chieftain into the afterlife. This is not a legend or a vague reference in a saga. This is physical, undeniable evidence of human sacrifice within Viking funerary rites. The positioning is critical. She was not laid beside the chieftain as an equal companion, but placed above him, a deliberate act that signifies her role as a possession, a part of his funerary goods. Who was this young woman? Was she a slave, a servant, or perhaps a captive from a raid? Her identity is lost, but her fate is horrifyingly clear. The Ballater burial forces us to confront the darkest aspects of this culture, where social hierarchy and religious belief could justify the ultimate act. It presents a stark duality in the Viking world, a society capable of creating breathtaking art and also sanctioning ritual murder. Why was this practice considered necessary? Some scholars suggest these sacrifices were meant to provide the deceased with servants or companions in the next world. Others believe it was a potent public display of a family's power, a demonstration that their authority extended even over life and death. The silent mound at Ballater does not offer comfort. It offers a sobering truth, a reminder that the journey to Valhalla or any other afterlife could have a very real and very tragic cost for those left behind. The ritual sacrifice at Ballater reveals a world turned inward, bound by local traditions and stark hierarchies. Yet another ship burial, this one from Gokstad, Norway, opens a window to a world of astonishing geographical reach. Within the great oak ship built for a king, archaeologists found a menagerie of sacrificed animals, including the skeletons of 12 horses, 6 dogs, and even 2 goshawks. But among these expected northern creatures was a discovery that defied all expectation: tiny bones that did not belong to any local species. They were the remains of a peacock. This vibrant bird, native to the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia, had no business being in a 9th century Scandinavian burial mound. Its presence was a silent testament to trade routes of almost unimaginable length and complexity. The peacock was not a practical commodity. It was a luxury item, a living symbol of immense wealth and global connection. The journey of this bird to Norway would have been epic, likely traveling overland through the trade networks of the Rus Vikings in modern-day Russia and Ukraine, or perhaps shipped across the Mediterranean and then north. It was a fragile, living piece of exotic beauty, transported thousands of miles to serve as a final, dazzling offering for a king. Think of the logistical feat, the constant care required to keep such a delicate creature alive through harsh climates and long voyages. Its ultimate sacrifice in the Gokstad burial was a statement of power far beyond martial strength. It proclaimed that this king's influence and connections stretched to the very edges of the known world. He could command not just the loyalty of his warriors, but the fruits of trade routes that spanned continents. The iridescent blue and green feathers of the peacock would have been a breathtaking sight in the grey Nordic landscape, a final, colourful fanfare for a man who had truly seen the world. What other impossible treasures, now lost to time, might have been laid to rest in these ships, only to decay back into the earth? Far to the west of Gokstad, across the vast and unforgiving Atlantic, lies another site that rewrites history. At Elant's Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, the remnants of Norse buildings stand as silent proof of Viking presence in North America around the year 1000. But it was a tiny, unassuming discovery in the floor of one of those huts that revealed the true scope of their exploration. Preserved in the peat were the shells of butternuts. These nuts, also known as white walnuts, do not grow anywhere near Newfoundland. Their natural range begins over 800 miles to the south, in the warmer climates of New Brunswick and the St. Lawrence River Valley. This means the Vikings who lived at Elance Aux Meadows did not just briefly land on the coast. They sailed far south, deep into the continent's interior, and they gathered these nuts perhaps for food, perhaps simply as a curious novelty from a new land. Think of that journey, navigating unknown rivers and coastlines in their iconic longships, encountering a landscape teeming with forests and resources unlike anything in Scandinavia or even Greenland. The butternuts were not placed in a burial mound like the Gokstad peacock, but their discovery in a hearth site serves a similar purpose for archaeologists. They are a grave good of sorts, not for a person but for the settlement itself, buried in the floor and waiting centuries to tell their story. This humble find is perhaps more revolutionary than any treasure of gold. It proves that the Norse exploration of the Americas was far more extensive than a single, struggling outpost on the northern edge. They found a land of plenty, a continent ripe for exploration, and they brought back tangible proof. Why then did they not stay? What did they encounter in those southern voyages that ultimately convinced them to abandon this new world? The butternut shells offer no answers, only the tantalizing certainty that the Vikings saw much more of America than we will ever truly know. Buried in a peat bog on the island of Gotland, a simple wooden chest held a treasure that speaks not of kings, but of the common genius that built the Viking age. This was the Masterma toolbox, a complete set of over 70 iron tools left behind over 1,000 years ago. Imagine the hands that last closed this chest, a master blacksmith or a ship's carpenter, who for some urgent reason never returned to claim his livelihood. Inside was an entire workshop, from heavy hammers and sturdy anvils to delicate tongs and intricate drills. There were specialized tools for every conceivable task, from shaping the curved planks of a longship to forging the intricate rivets that held it together. This was not a ceremonial deposit. This was a working kit, a practical collection that reveals the technological backbone of Norse society. The sheer variety of tools demonstrates a level of specialization that rivals a modern workshop. They had drawn knives for smoothing wood, complex locks and keys that show a concern for security, and even a collapsible balance scale for precise measurements. The Masterma find shatters any lingering notion of the Vikings as simple brutes. They were master engineers, and this toolbox is their manual. The sophistication of their tools directly enabled their greatest achievements, the swift ships that could cross oceans and the sturdy dwellings that weathered northern winters. This chest gives a name and a trade to the anonymous craftsmen who made the entire era possible. What incredible structures or vessels were built with these very instruments, and what emergency forced their owner to abandon such a vital part of his life? Gold, however, could also be a declaration of faith and political allegiance. On the windswept German island of Hiddensee, a discovery was made that shimmered with royal and divine significance. A treasure hunter combing the beach after a storm in the 19th century unearthed a hoard of gold jewelry so magnificent it could only belong to the highest echelon of Viking society. The collection consisted of a stunning neck ring, 10 intricate brooches, and 4 pendants, all crafted from the purest gold. The artistry is breathtaking, featuring the most delicate filigree work imaginable. Tiny beads and twisted wires of gold were soldered onto the surface to form intricate, looping patterns that seemed to move in the light. This was not the solid, heavy gold of a simple chieftain. This was the jewelry of a court designed to dazzle and proclaim a specific kind of power. The style and timing point directly to the court of Harald Bluetooth, the king who unified Denmark and famously converted his people to Christianity. The Hiddensee hoard is a perfect blend of traditional Norse animal ornamentation and the new Christian cross motifs. One of the pendants is a classic cross, its arms adorned with the same intricate filigree as the rest of the set. This was the jewelry of a new elite, one that embraced the political and spiritual shift sweeping across Scandinavia. Why was such a priceless royal set buried on a remote island? It was almost certainly hidden in a moment of extreme danger, perhaps during a rebellion or an invasion, by a noble fleeing for their life. The owner intended to return to reclaim this symbol of their status and faith, but they never did. The treasure waited silently for 1,000 years, a glittering testament to a king who used both the sword and the cross to build his kingdom, and to the anonymous individual whose fate became forever entwined with these golden loops and spirals. The power of a king could be proclaimed in gold, but it was often affirmed in water. On the shores of Lake Tiso in Denmark, the land itself tells a story of a place where the secular and the sacred were seamlessly woven together. This was not merely a settlement, but a sprawling, high-status complex known as a ring fortress, a center of both political power and profound religious devotion. For generations, the inhabitants of this place engaged in a remarkable practice. They would take objects of immense value and deliberately cast them into the lake. These were not lost items, they were gifts, carefully chosen offerings to unseen powers. The waters of Tiso received a king's ransom in treasures, from finely crafted swords and spears to exquisite jewelry of gold and silver. Each item, pulled from the hands of the living and given to the depths, represented a conversation with the divine. This was a continuous ritual, a way of currying favor with the gods, perhaps for a good harvest, victory in battle, or simply the continued prosperity of the ruling family. The act of deposition transformed the entire lake into a sacred altar. Think of the ceremony, the gathered community watching as a chieftain or priest raised a gleaming sword above the water before letting it slip beneath the surface, a permanent sacrifice to Odin or Thor. This practice blurs all modern lines between a town and a temple. At Tiso, the home of the powerful was also the house of the gods. The wealth thrown into the lake was a direct reinvestment of their material power into their spiritual authority, a cycle of giving that reinforced their right to rule. What drove them to sacrifice so much, and what did they believe they received in return from the silent, dark waters? Her grave at Birka held no sword, yet it spoke of a power that could command kings. This woman, laid to rest with strange and potent belongings, was a Volva, a master of prophecy and magic. Her most important tool was a long iron staff tipped with a distinctive metal cage. This was not a walking stick for the elderly. It was a sacred instrument, a key to other worlds. In the sagas, the Volva used such a staff to channel spirits, to divine the future, and to alter the fabric of fate itself. She was a figure of awe and sometimes fear, a person who could see the threads of destiny when others were blind. Her grave goods confirm this role with startling clarity. Alongside the staff, she had a small box filled with rare and potent herbs, likely used to induce trance-like visions. She was also buried seated in a chair, as if presiding over a final, silent council. This positioning was a powerful symbol of her authority, setting her apart even in death. Think of the scene when she was alive, perhaps summoned by a chieftain desperate to know the outcome of a coming battle. She would have entered the hall, her iron staff marking her as separate from all others. Seated in her high chair, surrounded by the smoke of her sacred herbs, she would journey into a state beyond ordinary perception, her chants revealing the will of the gods. Her knowledge was not just spiritual, it was deeply practical, blending medicine, psychology, and a profound understanding of human nature. The Birka Volva reminds us that Viking society had a complex spiritual hierarchy, where a woman with a staff could hold as much influence as a man with an axe. What visions did she see in her final trance, and what secrets did she take with her into the Danish earth? The power of a seeresses was deeply personal, but the pull of distant shores defined the Viking age itself. On the small Estonian island of Saaremaa, a routine construction project unearthed a scene of ancient, organized carnage. workers uncovered not one but two warships buried side by side in a coastal ridge. Inside were the skeletons of dozens of men, all of them warriors from what is now Sweden. This was not a ceremonial resting place for local chieftains. The Salmi ship burials are the graves of invaders, a raiding party that met a catastrophic end far from home. The larger ship held 33 men, their bodies stacked and arranged with a strange, hurried care. They were surrounded by their weapons, sword hilts still gleaming with silver and ivory inlay, their gaming pieces scattered beside them as if a final contest was left unfinished. Forensic analysis of their bones tells a brutal story. These men died in a violent confrontation. Their skeletons bear the marks of battle, from sword cuts on limbs to arrowheads still embedded in bone. They were not given a gentle burial by their enemies. This was a funeral conducted by their surviving comrades, a somber and desperate act to honor their fallen brothers on a hostile beach. The care taken in their arrangement, the precious goods buried with them, suggests they were high-status individuals, perhaps even the bodyguards of a nobleman or a king. Yet they all died together, their ambitious raid across the Baltic Sea ending in disaster. Why did they sail to this particular island? Were they seeking wealth, slaves, or a strategic foothold? Their failure was so complete that no one from their homeland ever came to reclaim the ships or the bodies. The Salmi burials are a time capsule of a single, failed moment, preserving the grim reality of early Viking expansion. They are also the earliest known Viking ship burials ever discovered, dating to around the year 750, decades before the more famous Oseberg and Gokstad ships. This pushes the start of the classic Viking age back even further, revealing that the thirst for adventure and plunder was already driving warriors across the sea generations earlier than we once believed. These two ships filled with silent, slain men are a haunting prologue to an era of exploration and conflict, a stark reminder that for every successful voyage there was a first tragic attempt. Long before the first Viking ships cut through the waves, a different kind of traveler was leaving his mark on the land. In the quiet earth of Sösdala, Sweden, a burial from the turbulent migration period holds the key to an artistic revolution. Here, a chieftain was laid to rest with his most prized possessions, not a sword or an axe, but the ornate fittings from his horse's harness. These were not simple functional pieces. They were masterworks of metal covered in a style of art that would echo for centuries. The Sösdala horseman's gear is decorated with what scholars call animal-style art, a dynamic and chaotic form where beasts are broken down into abstract, interlacing patterns. Limbs become spirals, bodies stretch into elongated ribbons, and creatures twist and bite in a mesmerizing dance of metal and imagination. This was not a local Scandinavian invention. The style has its roots in the steppes of Central Asia, carried westward by nomadic peoples like the Huns and the Avars as they moved across Europe. The presence of this art in a Swedish chieftain's grave is a powerful clue. It tells a story of cultural exchange that spanned the continent, a slow osmosis of ideas and aesthetics that flowed along trade routes and through conflicts. This chieftain or his artisans had seen this new, exciting style and adopted it, making it their own. They were at the forefront of a fashion that would eventually be refined and reimagined, becoming the foundation for the iconic Viking art we recognize today, like the styles found on the Mammon axe. The Sösdala horsemen were not Vikings, but they were their direct artistic ancestors. Their burial is a missing link, a moment frozen in time when the seeds of a great artistic tradition were first planted in Scandinavian soil. What other ideas, technologies, and beliefs were carried across Europe on the backs of horses and the belts of warriors, slowly weaving together the cultural tapestry that would one day explode into the Viking Age? Silk is a whisper of luxury, a fabric so delicate it seems to dissolve at a touch. Yet in the rich, dark soil of Birka, Sweden, this fragile material has survived for over 1,000 years, telling a story of commerce on an epic scale. Archaeologists sifting through the black earth of this ancient trading town have uncovered hundreds of tiny silk fragments. These are not the heavy, homespun wools of local Scandinavian weavers. This is the real thing, silk thread spun by silkworms thousands of miles away. The very presence of these scraps rewrites the map of the Viking world. Chemical analysis reveals that some of this silk came from the Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, a city of unimaginable wealth that the Vikings knew as Miklagard, the Great City. Other fragments have their origins even further east in the vast territories of the Islamic Caliphates. Think of the journey a single thread would have taken. It might have begun in a Persian workshop, woven into a magnificent robe for a caliph or a merchant prince. From there, it traveled along the legendary Silk Road, a sprawling network of overland routes, or perhaps it went north, up the great rivers of Russia controlled by Viking traders known as the Rus. These merchants would have carried furs, amber, and slaves south, returning with a fortune in silver coins and, as we now know, bundles of precious silk. For a Viking in Birka, owning even a small strip of this fabric was a powerful status symbol. It was not used to make entire garments, but as trim on a cloak, as a flash of color on a tunic, or as a decorative band on a hat. It was a subtle, yet undeniable, announcement that you were connected to the wider world, a person of taste and means who understood the value of things from beyond the horizon. These fragile threads, far more than any saga, prove that the Vikings were not just raiders. They were the master logisticians of their age, the bridge between the frozen north and the sun-drenched markets of the east, their trade networks so vast they truly did span continents. A merchant in Koppang would have judged wealth not by coins stamped with a king's face, but by the satisfying weight of silver in his palm. This bustling Norwegian trading town was a financial hub where currency was truly global, a fact proven by an enormous silver hoard buried there for safekeeping. When discovered, the cache was a numismatist's dream, a physical map of Viking trade routes. It contained a jumble of Arabic dirhams from the caliphates of Baghdad, coins minted by Anglo-Saxon kings in England, and a generous portion of what is known as hack silver. This was not a collection meant for display. This was a working treasury. The presence of so many different coin types all mixed together reveals an economy based on a universal standard, the purity and weight of the metal itself. A merchant would not care if a coin featured the name of an English king or an Arabic caliph. He would bring out his small, folding scale, weigh the silver, and determine its value based on that alone. The hack silver is perhaps the most telling component of all. These are chopped up fragments of jewelry, ingots, and even complete coins, cut into smaller pieces to make change for a transaction. A beautiful arm ring might be hacked into a dozen pieces, each one a viable form of payment. This practice shows a remarkably flexible and practical economic system, one designed for the chaotic, multicultural environment of a major port. Why was this particular hoard, a fortune by any measure, never recovered by its owner? Did a sudden raid send him fleeing, or did a shipwreck claim him before he could return to his hidden wealth? The Koppang silver does more than prove the Vikings were traders. It shows they were early globalists operating a sophisticated, weight-based economy that connected the silver mines of Afghanistan to the markets of York, all measured out on a portable scale. A warrior's face from the Viking age is almost entirely lost to us. While swords and axes survive by the thousands, the armor that protected the head is astoundingly rare. This makes the object pulled from a burial mound at Germund, Bu in Norway, nothing short of a miracle. It is the only near-complete Viking helmet ever discovered. Forged from iron, its most striking feature is the so-called spectacled guard, a solid metal mask that sweeps down to protect the eyes and nose, creating a narrow, intimidating visor. From its lower edge hangs a curtain of chainmail and aventail designed to shield the neck and shoulders from a slashing blow. This is not the horned helmet of folklore, a fantasy invented centuries later. This is the real thing, functional, fierce, and built for the brutal reality of combat. Its unparalleled rarity forces a dramatic rethinking of what a Viking warrior actually looked like. The near-total absence of other helmets does not mean they went bare-headed into battle. Instead, it suggests that such advanced protective gear was the exclusive property of the elite, warriors of immense wealth and status. A helmet like the one from G. Germund would have been incredibly expensive to produce, requiring the skill of a master smith and countless hours of labor. It was a mark of a professional warrior, a man who could afford the best defense because his life was constantly on the line. When he peered out from behind that spectacled guard, his vision narrowed to the fight ahead. He would have been a terrifying sight. The helmet's design is both practical and psychological, transforming the wearer into an impersonal, almost inhuman force. What happened to all the others? Were they so valuable that they were passed down for generations until they were worn out, or were they melted down and reforged into new weapons, their iron never meant to rest in the ground? The G. Germund helmet stands alone, a silent, stark reminder that the most common truths of an era are often the ones that decay first, leaving only the extraordinary behind to whisper of a lost world. The silence of the G. Germund helmet gives way to a chorus of bones in an English churchyard. At Repton, a site mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave that is the physical, brutal proof of the great heathen army's winter camp. This was not a random collection of dead. The remains of at least 264 individuals, nearly all men in the prime of their lives, were carefully piled within a charnel mound, a grim and organized repository for the fallen. The bones tell a story of hardened warriors, many showing signs of old, healed wounds that speak of a lifetime of combat. But it is the new injuries that reveal their final moments. Skulls were split by heavy axes, spines were severed by sword strokes, and one man was killed by a massive blow to the head that left the tip of a spear embedded deep in his femur. This was not a chaotic skirmish, but the result of a disciplined, large-scale military engagement. The great heathen army was a real, formidable force that invaded England in the 9th century, and the Repton grave is its muster roll written in bone. The location itself is significant. The mass grave was placed within a prehistoric burial mound right next to an Anglo-Saxon church. This was a deliberate act of power, a symbolic claiming of the sacred English landscape by the pagan invaders. They were not just camping for the winter, they were stamping their authority on the very heart of the kingdom, using the bones of their comrades to build a monument to their own strength and resolve. What was it like for the local population to witness this, to see their land transformed by this army that not only fought but buried its dead with such formidable, terrifying order? The Repton grave confirms the chronicles with chilling accuracy, forcing us to confront the scale and impact of an invasion that would forever change the map of England. The sheer scale of organized violence at Repton was only possible because of a level of centralized command that could marshal thousands. This same power is etched into the Danish landscape with geometric perfection at the Trelleborg fortress. Its massive, circular rampart and precisely arranged longhouses form a near-perfect circle, a design so mathematically exact it feels alien against the natural curves of the river and valley. This was not a haphazard defensive structure thrown up by local chieftains. Trelleborg was one of several nearly identical ring fortresses built across Denmark in the late 10th century, all following the same master blueprint. The engineering required was staggering. The circular wall was built from densely packed earth and timber, reinforced with a palisade and surrounded by a deep V-shaped ditch. Inside, 4 perfectly symmetrical quadrants were created by roads that crossed at the center, each quadrant holding 4 nearly identical longhouses arranged in a square. This is the Viking mind expressed in architecture, a society capable of both chaotic raids and meticulous, large-scale urban planning. The coordination of labor, resources, and skilled craftsmen to build such a place speaks of a single, powerful authority with control over the entire kingdom. The timing points directly to the reign of King Harald Bluetooth, the same king who unified Denmark and introduced Christianity. The Trelleborg fortresses were likely his grand project, a physical manifestation of his royal power. They were military strongholds, certainly, designed to house and train his royal army, the very force that could project power like the great heathen army. But they were also symbols, statements in earth and wood that told every local chieftain that a new, centralized order had arrived. The king's law, and his alone, would now be measured out in perfect circles and straight lines. Who were the master architects behind this grand design? And what did it feel like for a common farmer to be conscripted into a labor force building something so immense and impersonal? The fortress stands as a silent monument to the birth of the Scandinavian state, a place where the age of independent raider chieftains was finally and decisively brought to an end. The windswept shores of Sanday in Orkney hold the remains of a woman who defied the harshness of her time. She was laid to rest within the curve of an upturned boat, a vessel that had carried her people across the sea, now serving as her final chamber. Her skeleton revealed a life of exceptional longevity. She was well into her 70s, an age that was itself a rare achievement in the Norse world. This was not a pauper's grave. She was surrounded by a rich array of objects that spoke of a life of influence and respect. There were fine combs carved from antler, a pair of ornate bronze brooches that would have fastened her tunic, and the worn-down teeth of a sheep, likely a beloved pet or a vital part of her household. But the most intriguing object placed beside her was a smooth, polished plaque of whalebone, its surface etched with faint geometric patterns. This was no simple piece of decoration. Similar plaques have been found in other high-status female graves across the Norse world, and their purpose remains one of archaeology's quiet debates. Some believe they were ironing boards for pressing fine linen, a task that would signify her control over a wealthy household. Others suggest they were used in the making of ceremonial bread, or perhaps even as a symbolic surface for rituals, a slate for the magic of everyday life. Whatever its precise function, the whalebone plaque was a badge of authority, an object that marked her as a central figure in the community. Her burial tells a story not of a warrior but of a matriarch. She was one of the founders, a woman whose wisdom and skill helped to establish and maintain a Norse settlement on a distant Scottish island. While men may have sailed and fought, it was women like her who wove the social fabric that allowed these colonies to survive and thrive. She held the keys to the pantry, the knowledge of medicines, and the traditions that defined her people. Her grave is a powerful testament to the quiet, enduring power of age and experience in a society we so often associate only with youthful strength. What stories of survival and settlement did she take with her into the sand, and why did her community choose to honor her with such a poignant maritime tomb? A human skull from the Viking trading town of Hedeby holds a secret carved directly into the bone. This person lived through a remarkable medical procedure known as trepanation, where a skilled hand drilled a precise, square hole into their cranium. The bone around the edges of this opening shows clear signs of healing, proving this was not a fatal injury but a deliberate surgery that the individual survived. The technique was incredibly sophisticated, likely involving a sharp, cross-shaped tool that was carefully rotated to remove a small section of the skull, a process that would have relieved pressure on the brain. Imagine the scene, a healer in a bustling port town, using tools that were probably also used for woodworking to perform a life-saving intervention. This was not mere superstition. It was practical medicine born from observation and a logical, if terrifying, understanding of cause and effect. The patient may have suffered a severe head injury, perhaps from a fall or a blow in a fight, causing a dangerous buildup of fluid or swelling inside the skull. The healer's goal was simple: to physically release that pressure and restore the person's health. The success of this operation, evidenced by the healed bone, reveals a level of medical knowledge that we rarely attribute to the Viking Age. It shows a society that understood the basic connection between cranial pressure and certain ailments, and possessed the technical skill and courage to attempt a cure. Was the practitioner a barber surgeon, a wise woman, or a traveling doctor who had learned techniques from other cultures in the cosmopolitan center of Hedeby? This single skull, with its neat, square window, forces us to reconsider the limits of early medieval medicine and the quiet, everyday bravery of both the healer and the patient who placed their trust in such a radical procedure. These tiny, shimmering pieces of gold are no larger than a fingernail, yet they held a cosmic significance. Known as guldgubbar or golden old men, thousands of these delicate foils were discovered at a site in Lund, Sweden, each one stamped with an intricate miniature scene. The most common image is of two figures locked in a tender embrace, their stylized bodies facing one another in a moment of frozen intimacy. They are not warriors or kings, but something far more fundamental. Most scholars believe these fragile foils depict the divine marriage between the god Freya, a deity of fertility and peace, and the giantess Gerda. Their union, described in the poetic Edda, was a sacred myth explaining the cycle of the seasons and the fertility of the land itself. These were not pieces of jewelry or currency. They were ritual objects likely pressed onto the wooden pillars of a high-status hall or a temple during religious ceremonies. Imagine the scene during a blot, a sacrificial feast. As offerings were made to the gods, a participant might take one of these golden foils and carefully press it against a sacred post, a physical prayer for a good harvest, for prosperity, or for the continuation of life. Each tiny, gleaming figure was a direct link to the gods, a way of making the sacred story of Freya and Gerda physically present in the human world. The sheer number found at Lund suggests this was a practice repeated for generations, a continuous reaffirmation of a covenant between the people and the powers that governed their world. Why did they choose such a small, delicate medium for such an important task? Perhaps the fragility of the gold itself was part of the point, a reminder that the bonds of fertility and peace are precious and must be constantly nurtured. While swords and ships speak of power over people and places, the guldgubbar whisper of a deeper power, the hope for a world in balance, secured one tiny, golden embrace at a time. The whispers of sacrifice at Ballatair find a staggering echo in the wetlands of Ledger, Denmark. This was no ordinary settlement, but a place of legend, said to be the royal seat of the first Danish kings from the epic sagas. And the earth there has confirmed its grim reputation. For generations, the people of Ledger engaged in a profound and terrifying tradition, depositing a vast collection of objects into the marshes surrounding their great hall. These were not casual losses. Archaeologists have pulled a staggering array of artifacts from the peat, from shattered swords and spears to the bones of countless animals, all deliberately broken and offered to the waters. But the most haunting finds are the human remains, the skeletons of men, women, and even children, bearing the unmistakable marks of violent death. This was not a single, catastrophic event, but a sustained ritual practice that spanned centuries, a continuous cycle of giving that sought to maintain the balance between the human world and the divine. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Imagine the ceremony, a community gathering at the water's edge as their king or high priest consigned a fortune in weaponry and life itself to the insatiable bog. These sacrifices were a direct transaction with the gods, a plea for fertility, victory, and the continued legitimacy of the ruling dynasty. The body of a young woman placed carefully in the wetland might have been an offering to the goddess Freyja for a bountiful harvest. The shattered skull of a warrior could have been a gift to Odin, the god of war and death. Ledger was a place where royal power was literally built on a foundation of ritualized violence and sacred gifts. It forces us to ask what kind of belief system could demand such a price for so long, and what the people of legend truly believed they were purchasing from the gods with their most valuable possessions and with human lives. A bronze belt buckle found in a grave at Clinta on the island of Irland carries a scene of profound intimacy and power. The small, unassuming object depicts a woman, her hair long and flowing, standing before a mounted warrior. In her hands, she holds a large drinking horn which she offers to the man as he arrives. This is not a simple domestic scene. It is a moment frozen in metal, a possible vision of the afterlife itself. The woman is likely a Valkyrie, one of the mythical choosers of the slain, and this is her sacred duty. According to the old beliefs, a Valkyrie would not only decide which warriors died in battle, but would also greet them upon their arrival in Valhalla, offering them a horn of mead as their first reward in Odin's great hall. The Clinta buckle transforms this epic myth into a personal hope, a prayer cast in bronze. The person buried with this buckle, likely a warrior, carried with him a tangible promise. It was a guarantee that his courage would be recognized, that after the finality of death, a divine welcome awaited him. He would not be forgotten in the cold ground. Instead, a supernatural woman would meet him, her horn a symbol of honor, celebration, and eternal fellowship. This small artifact reveals how deeply these stories were woven into the fabric of everyday life and death. The promise of Valhalla was not just a tale told by skalds, but a comfort carried on a man's belt, a personal and portable piece of faith. What must it have meant to wear this scene every day, to feel its weight and know that your ultimate destiny was already beautifully, mythically foretold? A dragon once crowned the helmet of a warrior buried at Viking. Fashioned from gleaming bronze, its serpentine body coiled along the crest, a creature of myth made solid and real. This was not a hidden detail for private admiration. It was a public declaration, the first thing an enemy would see across a battlefield. When the warrior moved, the dragon would have caught the light, a shimmering, animate symbol of power and otherworldly protection. In Norse mythology, dragons were not merely monsters. They were potent forces, guardians of wisdom and destruction, creatures like Nidhöggr, who gnawed at the roots of the world tree. To wear a dragon was to invoke its essence, to claim its ferocity and its fearsome reputation as your own. This crest transformed the helmet from simple armor into a sacred object, a talisman that blurred the line between a man and a legend. The warrior beneath it was no longer just a fighter, he was a vessel for a primal force. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Imagine facing a shield wall and seeing that single, gleaming dragon crest rising above the others. It marked its wearer as a leader, a figure of such status that he could command the skills of a master metalsmith to create his terrible crown. Was the dragon meant to protect him physically, or was its true power to unnerve his opponents, to sow doubt before the first blow was even struck? This small, ornate object speaks of a world where warfare was as much about perception as it was about strength, where the most powerful weapon could be a story given form in bronze. A stone from the Swedish island of Gotland tells a story without a single written word. The Kellunge picture stone stands as a massive, carved canvas, its surface alive with figures and symbols from the world of Norse myth. This was not merely a grave marker, it was a storyboard for the afterlife, a public declaration of faith and memory designed to be understood by everyone who saw it. The central scene is one of majestic travel. A powerful figure rides a horse, but this is no ordinary steed. It has 8 legs, a clear and unmistakable identifier of Sleipnir, the supernatural horse of the god Odin. This single detail transforms the entire stone. The rider is likely Odin himself, the All-Father, on a journey between the worlds. He is shown arriving at a grand hall, a place scholars believe represents Valhalla, the final destination for the honored dead. Other scenes on the stone swirl around this central journey, depicting ships, warriors, and intricate knotwork that may symbolize the endless cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The person who commissioned this stone was making a powerful statement about the individual buried beneath it. They were claiming that their loved one was not lost but had been chosen by Odin, welcomed into the divine company of the slain. The stone served as a permanent gateway, a fixed point in the landscape where the myth of the gods and the reality of human loss intersected. Think of the community that gathered here, looking up at this carved narrative. For them, it was not ancient history, it was a current event, a confirmation that the stories they heard in the Great Hall were true. The stone offered comfort, but it also reinforced social order, displaying the family's wealth, their piety, and their connection to the divine. Why did they choose this specific myth, this image of Odin's arrival? Were they seeking his protection for the departed soul? Or were they proclaiming that the deceased had lived a life worthy of such a god's attention? The Kellunge stone holds its silence, a magnificent and enduring puzzle whose symbols we can decipher, but whose deepest personal meaning is forever locked in the stone. A small bronze man sits in meditation, a quiet traveler from a world away. Found on the Swedish island of Helga, this Buddha statuette is barely the size of a thumb, yet its journey was epic. It did not travel with monks or missionaries, but with merchants. Scientific analysis confirms it was cast in the 6th century, not in Scandinavia, but in a workshop in northern India in the region of Kashmir. Think of the immense distance, over 4,000 miles as the crow flies, across mountains, deserts, and seas. This tiny icon passed through countless hands, from the bustling markets of the Silk Road to the river routes of the Rus Vikings, before finally coming to rest in a Scandinavian trading hub. It is a perfect piece of evidence that the Viking world was not an isolated corner of Europe, but a terminus for a global network of exchange. The Buddha was not likely an object of worship for its Norse owner. Instead, it was probably seen as a curious and exotic trinket, a fascinating artifact from a culture so distant it might as well have been from another planet. Its value was in its strangeness, its material, and the story of its origin. A Viking trader weighing it in his hand would have recognized the skill of its craftsmanship and the rarity of its bronze, understanding that its very presence in his homeland spoke of his own far-reaching connections. This one small figure collapses the map, proving that a trade route could connect a Hindu Kush mountain pass to a Swedish fjord. What other philosophical ideas or artistic styles might have hitched a ride on these long journeys, subtly influencing the North in ways we have yet to fully understand? The Buddha from Helga was a rare import, but other materials flowed into Birka in a steady, commercial river. In a quiet corner of this bustling town, archaeologists uncovered the workshop of an amber master. The floor was literally paved with his raw material, a thick carpet of amber nuggets in every shade from pale gold to deep, rich orange. These were not finished beads or ornaments, but the raw, unworked pieces straight from the Baltic coast, the very inventory of his craft. Amber is fossilized tree resin, a substance that feels warm to the touch and captures light in a way stone never could. In the hands of this Birka artisan, these rough chunks were transformed. The workshop held the tools of his trade, fine drills and polishing stones, used to shape the amber into smooth, round beads and intricate pendants. This was not a hobby. This was a specialized industry, a factory line of beauty operating over 1,000 years ago. Think of the process, the craftsman sitting in his workshop, perhaps with a window overlooking the harbor. He would select a piece of raw amber, feeling its weight and potential. With a bow drill, he would patiently bore a hole through its center, the air filling with the faint, piney scent of the heated resin. Then came the polishing, hours of rubbing the bead against a stone with fine sand until it was as smooth as glass and glowed with an inner fire. These beads were more than decoration. They were a form of currency and a powerful symbol of connection. A strand of Birka amber beads could end up around the neck of a trader from Baghdad or a chieftain in Iceland. This small workshop connects the dots of the Viking world, from the Baltic forests where the amber was gathered, to the skilled hands of a Birka artisan, and finally to the far-flung markets that craved its warm, golden light. What stories of distant shores and foreign people might those polished beads have overheard as they passed from one owner to the next? Carved from wood with a ferocious, gaping expression, the animal head posts from Valskerd are more than mere decoration. These formidable objects, found standing within the boat graves of chieftains, are believed to be stylized representations of the ship's prow itself, a part of the vessel imbued with its own spirit and power. In a culture that saw its ships as living entities, the prow was the face it presented to the world, and these posts gave that face a permanent, terrifying form. The beasts depicted are often serpents or dragons, their jaws wide open as if to swallow the seas or intimidate any spirit that might block the final passage. Placed within the grave, they served a crucial symbolic function. A ship burial was not just an interment, it was a launch. The chieftain was being sent on a voyage to the afterlife, and this prow post was the figurehead for that ultimate journey. It was the part of the ship that would cut through the boundaries between worlds, guiding the soul through unknown waters to its divine destination. Imagine the final ceremony, the chieftain laid out in his ship with all his treasures, and this carved wooden head standing watch at the symbolic front of the vessel, its fierce eyes staring into the darkness of the burial mound as if looking toward a distant shore. Was it meant to protect the traveler, to announce his arrival with authority, or to frighten away malevolent forces that might lurk in the realms of the dead? The silent, snarling heads offer no easy answers, only the powerful impression of a people who believed that even in death, you needed a good ship and a bold figurehead to see you through. Buried alongside the Oseberg queens was a vehicle of stunning artistry, a wooden cart so elaborate it defies simple explanation. Its every surface is a riot of carved wood, covered in what scholars call the gripping beast motif. These are not peaceful creatures, they are sinuous, muscular animals, their limbs twisted into impossible knots, their paws and claws gripping frantically at the frames of the cart and sometimes at their own bodies. This is a masterpiece of chaos given form, a swirling narrative of power and mythology carved from oak. The sheer effort required to create it suggests it was no ordinary farm cart for hauling goods. So what was its true purpose? One compelling theory is that it served as a ceremonial chariot, used in religious processions for a vulva like the older woman in the ship. It could have carried her through the community during sacred festivals, a moving throne that displayed her spiritual authority. Alternatively, it might have been a luxury item for the elite, a symbol of status used for local travel by a woman of royal blood. But the most haunting possibility is that it was built for a journey we can scarcely comprehend. Placed within the burial ship, it may have been intended as a vehicle for the afterlife, a means for the queen to travel through the otherworld in the same style and comfort she enjoyed in life. The gripping beasts that adorn it could be protective spirits, their fierce forms warding off malevolent forces on that final road. Was this ornate cart a practical possession, a ritual object, or a divine conveyance? Its silent, intricate carvings offer no single answer, only a profound glimpse into a world where even travel was woven through with myth, power, and the promise of what lies beyond. A tiny piece of bone from the German grave holds a voice from the past. This is not the grand boast of a king carved in stone, but a simple, personal inscription etched onto a rib. It reads, "Kiss me," a direct and intimate plea that feels startlingly human across the centuries. We do not know who wrote it or who it was meant for. Was it a playful message between lovers, a private joke among friends, or a lonely wish scratched into a spare piece of bone? This artifact is profoundly rare because it is not about status, warfare, or the gods. It is about a fundamental human emotion, a desire for connection that transcends time and culture. The runes themselves are crudely carved, the work of an ordinary person, not a professional rune master. This makes the message even more powerful. While the magnificent helmet from the same burial speaks of public power and martial identity, this bone fragment reveals the private individual beneath the armor. It reminds us that these were people who laughed, loved, and longed for affection, just like anyone today. In a world defined by sagas of epic heroes, this is a whisper of a different story, the quiet, everyday life that history so often forgets. How many other personal thoughts and feelings were expressed on materials too fragile to survive? The G-Germaned Bu inscription is a fragile thread connecting us directly to a single, anonymous heart, a poignant reminder that the deepest mysteries are often the most human. A gilded silver cup gleams from the Danish earth, its surface etched with scenes of classical mythology. Found at the ritual site of Tissot, this magnificent vessel is a foreigner, a piece of continental elegance deposited in a place of Norse power. Its style is unmistakably Frankish, the work of craftsmen from the empire of Charlemagne. So how did such an opulent object, a treasure fit for a king's table, end up in a Danish wetland? There are two compelling possibilities, each revealing a different facet of Viking diplomacy. It could have been a diplomatic gift, a lavish present from a Frankish emperor seeking to buy peace from a troublesome Danish king. In this scenario, the cup is a tool of statecraft, its value meant to secure a border or forge a temporary alliance. But there is another, more violent path it might have taken. It could just as easily be the finest loot from a successful raid on a Frankish monastery or a royal estate, a prize seized by force and brought home in triumph. The cup itself cannot tell us which story is true, and that is the point. It embodies the dual nature of Viking interaction with Europe, a fluid dance between negotiation and plunder. A chieftain at Tissot might have sipped from this very cup, a symbol of his ability to extract wealth from the powerful Franks, whether through threat or trade. Its ultimate fate, cast into the sacred waters of the lake, transformed it once more from a symbol of worldly power into an offering for the gods. This single object connects a local Danish power center to the grand halls of continental Europe, proving that the Vikings were not just outsiders looking in. They were active, formidable players in European politics, their influence measured in the weight of stolen, or perhaps gifted, silver. Two graves at Birka, set side by side, tell a story of devotion that ended in a shared violent fate. One belonged to a woman of immense status, a Volva or seeress, her authority marked by the iron staff of prophecy. The other, just a few paces away, held the body of a young man. He was a warrior buried with a full array of weapons, an axe, a sword, and a quiver of arrows. The woman's grave was filled with the tools of her sacred craft, while the man's was equipped for battle. Their simultaneous deaths and careful burial pose a haunting question. Was this man her loyal protector, a sworn shield who followed his mistress even into death? Or was his life taken, a ritual sacrifice to ensure the powerful seeress would not journey to the afterlife alone? The evidence is chillingly ambiguous. There are no obvious signs of violence on his skeleton, no clear cut of a blade. This could suggest a willing act, a solemn pact fulfilled through poison or some other method that leaves no mark on bone. He would have been her herdman, her retainer, whose oath of service transcended the boundary between life and death, yet the power dynamic is inescapable. She was the central figure, the one whose spiritual journey required such a profound escort. His burial, though honorable, was an extension of her own. This double grave presents a stark picture of the bonds that could tie people together in the Viking world. Bonds of loyalty so absolute they demanded the ultimate price, or bonds of hierarchy so rigid that a servant's life was part of a chieftain's funeral goods. Were they bound by affection or by duty? The two skeletons in the Birka soil hold their secret close, a permanent testament to the complex and sometimes terrible obligations of the past. A king's power is often measured by his ability to connect his people, a truth literally carved in stone on the island of Adelsur. Here, overlooking the ancient trading hub of Birka, stands the Hovgarden runic stone, a massive slab of granite that is far more than a monument. It is a royal decree from the 11th century commissioned by King Olaf Skirtkonung and his Jarl, or Earl, named Ragnvald. The runes declare with simple authority that these two men raised the stone in memory of themselves and that they built a bridge for the souls of the departed. This bridge was not a metaphorical one. It was a physical, wooden structure, a vital piece of civic infrastructure that allowed travelers and traders to cross from the royal seat on a Delsur to the commercial heart of Birka. The inscription is a brilliant piece of political messaging. By taking credit for this public work, the king and his Jarl were presenting themselves as benefactors, as leaders who used their power to improve the lives and commerce of their subjects. They were not just warriors extracting tribute, they were administrators building a kingdom. The mention of the bridge being for the souls of the dead ties this earthly power to divine favor, suggesting that their good works would earn them grace in the afterlife. This single stone provides a rare and direct window into the machinery of the early Swedish state. It shows a kingdom organized enough to undertake public construction projects, with a king confident enough to share credit with his most powerful subordinate. Why choose a bridge as their lasting legacy? In a landscape of water and islands, a bridge was a symbol of unity and control, a taming of the natural world that mirrored the king's effort to tame his realm. The Hovgarden stone is the voice of the state itself, a permanent reminder that the most enduring power is not always found in a sword, but sometimes in the planks of a well-built bridge. A skeleton from the bustling port of Koppang tells the story of a life lived on the very edge of survival. This man's bones are a catalogue of violence endured and overcome. His body bore the marks of multiple, fully healed fractures, including broken ribs and a damaged arm, each a testament to a separate, brutal encounter. The most severe injury, however, was to his leg, a devastating wound that would have left him severely crippled and in constant pain. He could no longer have been an effective fighter or a sailor hauling ropes. In a society so dependent on physical strength and mobility, such an injury should have been a death sentence, consigning him to neglect and a rapid end. Yet the evidence is undeniable. His bones show clear signs of long-term healing. He did not just survive this catastrophic damage, he lived with it for years. This survival speaks not of his own toughness alone, but of the community that surrounded him. Someone in Koppang took on the responsibility of his care. They provided him with food, shelter, and protection during a long and arduous recovery when he could contribute nothing to the household. This was not an act driven by cold utility. It was an act of profound humanity, a demonstration that Viking society understood the value of a person beyond their immediate physical labor. Perhaps he was a respected elder whose wisdom was deemed vital, or a beloved family member whose life was worth preserving at any cost. His skeleton forces us to look past the romanticized warrior and see the complex social bonds that held these communities together. In the shadow of the trade ships and market stalls, compassion was a currency just as real as silver, a quiet force that could mend broken bones and sustain a life long after the fighting was done. While the amber master worked with the warm glow of fossilized resin, another craftsman in Birka harnessed the element of fire itself to transform distant sands into objects of desire. Tucked away in the town's industrial quarter, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a glass beadmaker's furnace, a simple clay structure that was a portal to a global trade network. This was not a place where finished beads were merely strung together. This was a factory of light and color where raw materials underwent a magical transformation. The craftsman's primary ingredient was cullet, chunks of raw glass that chemical analysis shows originated from the Middle East, possibly as far as Egypt or Syria. Think of the journey these glass blocks took, traveling thousands of miles along trade routes, carried by ship and cart until they reached this small workshop in Sweden. Inside the furnace, the craftsman would stoke a fire hot enough to melt the solid glass into a viscous, glowing liquid. Using metal rods, he would carefully gather a small amount of this molten material, then twist, stretch, and layer different colors to create intricate patterns. He might drag a point through the soft glass to form delicate stripes or embed tiny threads of gold foil for a shimmering effect. Each bead was a miniature masterpiece, its unique design proof of the artist's skill and the owner's wealth. The finished beads were more than mere decoration. They were dense concentrations of value and connection, a wearable form of currency that proclaimed the wearer's access to the farthest reaches of the known world. A single strand represented the sands of the Middle East, the fire of a Scandinavian workshop, and the cosmopolitan taste of a Viking Age elite. What stories of desert caravans and foreign marketplaces were whispered around the furnace as the glass slowly cooled, capturing light from across continents within its tiny, perfect form. Within the great Gokstad ship built for a king's final voyage lay a king's ransom in practical treasures. Alongside weapons and tools, archaeologists discovered a complete set of gaming pieces carved from the bone of whales and the antler of deer. These were not mere trinkets for passing a quiet afternoon. They were the essential equipment for Nefertafel, a game of pure strategy often called the Viking chess. Picture the scene during a long ocean crossing, the sail taut above, the sea stretching to the horizon. In a sheltered spot on the deck, two men would have hunched over a board, their pieces arrayed between them. One player controlled a king and his small band of defenders positioned at the board's center. The other commanded a larger force of attackers, their goal to capture the king and prevent his escape to the board's edges. Every move was a lesson in tactics, a simulation of a skirmish where outnumbered defenders had to use their wits to survive. This was not just a game, it was a training exercise for the mind. The presence of such a set in a royal burial speaks volumes about the value the Vikings placed on strategic thought. A successful chieftain needed more than brute strength. He needed the ability to plan several steps ahead, to anticipate an opponent's moves, and to sacrifice lesser pieces to protect the king. The Gokstad gaming pieces transform our image of these voyages from mindless drudgery to journeys filled with intense concentration and intellectual challenge. What complex strategies were devised over that very board, and did the lessons learned in these mock battles ever turn the tide of a real one? Buried with the fallen warriors on the Estonian shore were blades that told a story of their own long before their final battle. The swords from the Salmi ship burials were not simple iron bars. They were masterpieces of metallurgy, forged using a technique known as pattern welding. This was not merely about making a sharp edge, it was about creating a weapon of breathtaking beauty and lethal efficiency. The process was incredibly complex. A smith would begin by taking multiple rods of iron and steel, each with a different carbon content. These rods were heated, twisted together like a piece of rope, and then hammer forged into a single, solid blade. This twisting and folding was repeated over and over, building up hundreds of layers within the metal. When the finished blade was polished and lightly etched with a weak acid, the different metals reacted in contrasting shades, revealing a mesmerizing, watery pattern of swirling lines and shadows deep within the steel. This was the smith's signature, a permanent, swirling fingerprint locked inside the weapon. But this beauty was not just for show. The technique had a vital, practical purpose. By combining softer, more flexible iron with harder, more brittle steel, the smith created a blade that was both incredibly sharp and remarkably resilient, a sword that would not snap in the heat of a desperate fight. For the warrior who carried it, this swirling pattern was a public declaration of his supreme status. He was not a common fighter with a simple weapon. He was an aristocrat, a leader who could afford the finest technology of his age. The shimmering dance of light and dark on his blade would have been instantly recognizable to his peers, a silent language of wealth, connection, and lethal expertise. In the dim light of a feasting hall, that subtle, rippling pattern would have told everyone present that this was a man of consequence, whose very sword was a map of his privilege and power. What other secrets of fire and metal are still waiting to be pulled from the earth, their stories written not in runes but in the very structure of the steel? A wooden sledge unearthed from the wet soils of Hedeby was far more than a tool for hauling firewood. This was practical luxury on runners, a vehicle designed for the harsh Scandinavian winter but carved with the care of a royal artisan. Every surface of the sledge was adorned with the same gripping beast style found on the Oseberg cart, its sinuous creatures writhing in an elegant, frozen dance. Imagine this object in use gliding across a snow-packed path, not with a load of logs but carrying a high-status woman wrapped in furs, her breath misting in the cold air. The rhythmic sound of the runners on the snow would have been accompanied by the visible display of her family's wealth, a moving billboard of their status. In a world where travel was difficult for much of the year, the sledge turned necessity into a spectacle. It proclaimed that even the most mundane task, like a journey to a neighboring farm, could be an occasion for displaying power and refinement. The Hedeby sledge blurs the line between the utilitarian and the opulent, forcing us to reconsider what constituted wealth in the Viking Age. It was not just about hoarded silver or fine weapons, but about infusing daily life with beauty and symbolic meaning. Why merely travel when you could make a statement with every glide through the winter landscape? A ship burial at Balladul on the Isle of Man was placed with deliberate, brutal precision. The Norse chieftains who constructed this grave did not choose an empty field. They dug their mighty trench directly through the center of an existing Christian cemetery, scattering the bones of the earlier dead to make room for their own. This was more than just a burial, it was a territorial claim carved into the earth itself. The message was unmistakable and intended for the local population to see and understand. The old order was gone, physically supplanted by the new. A pagan ship, the ultimate symbol of Norse identity and power, now sailed eternally over the graves of the Christian faithful. Imagine the psychological impact on the community, watching their ancestral resting place so violently desecrated to make a political point. The chieftain within that ship was not merely being honored, he was being used as a permanent declaration of dominance. His burial was the final word in a silent, brutal argument over who truly owned the land and its soul. Why go to such lengths? This was not a random act of disrespect, but a calculated ritual of conquest, a way for the incoming Norse elite to sever the spiritual connection between the native Manx people and their land, replacing their god with the old gods of the north. The mound at Balladul stands as a stark monument to a clash of worlds, where the dead were enlisted as soldiers in a war of beliefs. The geometric perfection of Trelleborg Fortress was not just a display of military order, it was also a place for meticulous personal care. Within the barracks of this rigidly planned stronghold, archaeologists have uncovered a surprising number of personal items, most notably dozens of finely crafted combs carved from deer antler. These are not crude, single-piece objects. They are complex artifacts made from multiple plates of antler riveted together, with a central spine and two sets of teeth, one side with coarse teeth for untangling and the other with fine teeth for smoothing and removing lice. Every soldier, it seems, carried one. This simple, everyday object shatters the grimy stereotype of the unkempt, filthy barbarian. For the Viking warrior, grooming was a non-negotiable part of daily life. A well-kept beard and neatly braided hair were marks of a civilized person, a sign of self-respect and discipline that was as important within the community as skill with an axe. These combs were more than just tools, they were prized personal possessions, often decorated with simple geometric patterns or animal figures, and sometimes even repaired with tiny metal stitches when they broke. Think of the scene inside one of those symmetrical longhouses after a long day of training or construction. Men would be sitting by the fire, carefully working the tangles from their hair and beards, maintaining the very appearance that defined their identity. This widespread attention to hygiene was also practical. A clean, deloused individual was a healthier one, and in the close quarters of a fortress or a longship, community health was a matter of survival. The Trelleborg combs remind us that the Vikings were a people of order and pride, who built their formidable reputation not on savagery, but on a foundation of discipline that extended from the grand scale of a ring fortress down to the fine teeth of a personal comb. The grand feasts of the Viking Age left their echoes not in sagas, but in the bones scattered within the Valsgärd boat graves. Alongside the chieftains and their weapons, archaeologists uncovered the culinary remnants of their final send-off, a detailed menu for both the funeral celebration and the journey beyond. The variety is staggering. There were cuts of prime meat from domesticated cattle, pigs, and sheep, the bones carefully butchered and broken to access the rich marrow within. But this was not a simple meal of livestock. The graves also yielded the bones of wild birds and fish, evidence of a sprawling feast that drew from every part of the Norse world. Imagine the scene before the burial mound was sealed. The community would have gathered, honoring their leader with a meal that showcased their wealth and the bounty of the land and sea. This was a social ritual, a final act of communal bonding that reinforced the chieftain's generosity and the loyalty of his people. Yet the food served a second, more profound purpose. It was also provisions for the unknown road ahead. Placing these specific foods in the grave was a practical act of care, ensuring the deceased would not hunger on his voyage to the afterlife. The inclusion of fish and fowl is particularly telling. It suggests a belief that the soul's journey would require sustenance from all realms, not just the farmstead, but from the skies and the deep waters as well. Was the choice of each animal symbolic, or simply a reflection of the most luxurious foods available? The silent, scattered bones offer no recipe, only the certainty that for the Vikings, a proper farewell required a well-stocked larder for both the mourners and the departed, bridging the world of the living and the dead with a final, generous feast. Woven into the very fabric of the Oseberg ship was a story begging to be read. Scattered across the burial chamber lay the fragile remains of a woolen tapestry, its vibrant colors long faded but its narrative power still immense. These are not large, intact panels, but a puzzle of fragments, each one a precious clue to a lost visual world. When painstakingly reassembled, the scenes spring to life. We see a solemn procession of ornate carts, much like the one buried with the queens, pulled by teams of powerful horses. People walk alongside, their garments detailed with care, their purpose unclear but their importance undeniable. The tapestry does not merely depict objects, it captures motion and ceremony, freezing a moment of profound significance in dyed thread. Some figures appear to carry weapons or ritual objects, while others seem to be women of high status, their place in the procession hinting at a complex social hierarchy. The most tantalizing fragments suggest this is more than a record of a real event. Interwoven with the human figures are strange, mythical-looking beasts and stylized trees that scholars believe could represent Yggdrasil, the great world tree of Norse cosmology. This blurring of lines is what makes the Oseberg tapestry so revolutionary. It suggests that the procession we are witnessing was not just a funeral, but a ritual that reenacted a sacred myth, a journey that mirrored the soul's passage from the human world to the divine. The queens were not just traveling to a grave, they were retracing a path laid out by the gods themselves, their story literally woven into the fabric of their ship. This was not a decoration, it was a visual saga, a portable epic in wool that surrounded the deceased with its protective and narrative power. What other epic poems, now lost to time, were once illustrated in such brilliant color, their stories unfolding not on parchment but on the loom? Even in the stark practicality of a warrior's grave, there was room for a more subtle kind of protection. Among the weapons and strategic game pieces of the Birka female warrior was a small, personal object, a silver ring. But this was no simple piece of jewelry. Set into its face was a white, milky stone, likely a piece of rock crystal, and carefully carved into that stone was a distinct symbol. It was an apotropaic mark, a sign specifically designed to turn away evil, harm, and malevolent forces. This ring was a spiritual shield, a piece of armor for the soul. In a world where the line between the physical and the supernatural was thin, a warrior faced threats that a sword alone could not parry. Malevolent spirits, curses from a rival, or the simple bad luck that could turn the tide of a battle were all very real dangers. The ring was a defense against these invisible enemies, a constant, wearable charm that offered a layer of security no iron mail could provide. Its presence in her grave suggests she, or those who buried her, believed she would need this protection on her journey to the afterlife as well. This single artifact beautifully merges the two sides of her existence. In one hand, she held a steel sword to defend against earthly foes. On her finger, she wore a silver ring to guard against supernatural ones. It reveals a mind that was both tactically brilliant and deeply spiritual, understanding that true readiness meant being prepared for every kind of battle, both seen and unseen. What other quiet symbols of faith and protection have we overlooked in the graves of warriors, mistaking them for mere decoration? The Germaned Boo burial mound offered more than just its iconic helmet. Alongside that rare face guard lay an even more exceptional treasure, a complete chainmail shirt. In a world where most warriors relied on leather and luck, this garment was a technological marvel. Crafted from thousands of interlocking iron rings, each one meticulously riveted closed, it formed a flexible, metal second skin that could turn a lethal sword slash into a survivable cut. The sheer labor involved was staggering. A single shirt required one skilled artisan months of tedious work, forging each link, punching it flat, riveting it shut, and weaving it into the complex pattern. This was not mass-produced armor, it was a bespoke suit for a warrior of paramount importance. Its weight, over 20 pounds of iron, was a burden only the strongest and wealthiest could afford to bear. For the man who wore it, this shirt was a walking declaration of his supreme status. On the battlefield, its presence was both practical and psychological. While others fought exposed, he moved within a shell of woven iron. His survival chances multiplied. The dull gleam of the rings would have been instantly recognizable to friend and foe alike, marking him as a leader, a target, and a man who had invested a fortune in his own defense. Why was such a vital piece of warrior's equipment so incredibly rare? Its value was so immense that it was likely passed down through generations, an heirloom of protection, until it was finally laid to rest with its last owner. The Germaned Boo mail shirt forces us to see the Viking warrior not just as a fearless fighter, but as a pragmatic professional who understood that the ultimate advantage was not always in the strength of your arm, but in the quality of the iron on your back. A small skeleton curled beside the human remains in the Birka grave was not that of a dog or a horse, but of a cat. This was no feral barn cat, but a domestic animal deliberately placed in the burial, its body positioned with clear intention. In the Norse world, cats held a special and complex significance. They were practical creatures, valued for their ability to protect grain stores from rodents, but their connection ran far deeper than simple pest control. The goddess Freyja, one of the most powerful and beloved deities in the pantheon, had a profound association with felines. Her chariot was said to be drawn by two large, magnificent cats, animals that were both graceful and fiercely independent, much like the goddess herself. To bury someone with a cat, then, was to make a powerful spiritual statement. This feline companion could have been a beloved pet, a cherished member of the household whose bond with its owner was so strong it was chosen to make the final journey. Its presence would have offered comfort and a familiar spirit in the unknown realms of the afterlife, yet the act also resonates with potent ritual meaning. The cat could have been an offering to Freyja herself, a sacred gift intended to secure the goddess's favor for the deceased. Freyja was a ruler over love, fertility, and also the realm of Folkvanga, where she received half of those who died in battle. A cat sacrificed in her honor might have been a key, a plea for a welcoming reception in her great hall. Was this particular cat a daily companion, curling by the fire and purring in its owner's lap, or was it a specially chosen religious symbol, its feline nature a direct link to the divine? The small, silent bones in the Firkat soil cannot tell us about the softness of its fur or the sound of its meow, but they speak eloquently of a world where the line between a pet and a sacred offering was beautifully and mysteriously blurred. The authority to command a fleet or commission a runestone began not in a king's hall, but in an open field. At Hovgarden on the island of Adelsur, a natural amphitheater facing the trading hub of Birka served as the Thing, the Viking Age assembly where free men gathered to debate laws, settle disputes, and affirm their leaders. This was the birthplace of Scandinavian democracy, a noisy public forum where the collective will of the people was forged. But the landscape surrounding this space was carefully curated to remind everyone of exactly who was in charge. Encircling the assembly site were numerous large burial mounds, silent, imposing monuments to the ancestors of the ruling dynasty. As a chieftain stood to speak, his words were backed by the visible presence of his lineage, the ancient mounds looming behind him like stone witnesses. These were not random graves, they were a deliberate political statement, a permanent claim to the land and the right to rule it. Every decision made at that thing was made under the gaze of the past, a powerful psychological tool that linked current authority to generations of dead heroes. The message was simple and undeniable. The power to make law here did not come from popular appeal alone. It was inherited, blessed by the ancestors who watched from the hills. This was a society that deeply respected its past, and the ruling families of Hovgarden masterfully used that reverence to cement their own position. Why build your seat of power here unless you could literally point to the mounds and say, "My family has always been here and we always will be"? The assembly site was a theater of the living, but its most persuasive actors were the long-dead nobles resting in the earth. The ledger wetlands held more than shattered swords and sacrificial bones. They also preserved whispers of creation itself. Scattered in their thousands around the royal hall were the gullgubber, those impossibly thin gold foils, each one stamped with the same intimate scene. A man and a woman stand facing each other, their bodies stylized into elegant lines, locked in a tender and eternal embrace. This was not random imagery. The sheer concentration of these figures at a place of royal power points to a ritual of profound importance, repeated over and over for generations. Most scholars see in these embracing couples the divine marriage of the god Freya and the giantess Gerda, a union described in the old poems as essential for the world's fertility. Freya, a god of peace, sunshine, and abundant harvests, had to win the hand of Gerda, who represented the frozen, untamed earth. Their sacred wedding was the mythological event that melted the winter frost, brought forth the spring crops, and ensured the prosperity of the entire community. These tiny gold foils were physical prayers for that divine union. Imagine a ceremony at Ledger, perhaps during the planting season or at the height of summer. A participant would take one of these delicate foils and carefully press it onto a wooden post of the Great Hall, or maybe onto a carved idol of the gods. With each press, they were not just telling a story, they were actively participating in it. They were reinforcing the sacred bond between Freya and Gerda, a bond that directly translated to full granaries, healthy livestock, and peace in the kingdom. The act transformed the royal seat into a spiritual engine, where the king's authority was directly linked to his ability to intercede with the gods for his people's well-being. Why use such fragile, miniature objects for such a vital task? Perhaps the delicacy of the gold itself was part of the ritual, a reminder that the balance of nature is a precious and fragile thing, requiring constant care and reaffirmation. While the sacrifices in the lake dealt with the stark realities of death and power, the gullgubber dealt with the gentle, enduring hope for life and growth. In that divine, golden embrace, a community found the promise of its own survival. Charred grains of barley and wheat scattered through the Repton campfire pits tell a story far removed from the simple plunder of a raiding party. These were not the remnants of a meal stolen from a local village, but the systematic evidence of an army planting roots. The great heathen army was not merely passing through, it was settling in, and its leaders understood that true power required more than just sharp swords. It demanded full bellies and a stable economy. The presence of this charred grain, carefully stored and then accidentally burned, reveals a sophisticated logistical operation. This was not a temporary war camp, but a forward base with an eye on the future. They were processing their own grain, likely harvested from seized Anglo-Saxon fields, preparing to bake bread and brew beer on a scale that could sustain thousands of men through a long, cold winter. This shift from raider to settler is one of the most significant transformations of the Viking Age. A raider takes what he can carry and moves on. A settler builds, plants, and plans for the next harvest. The grain at Repton is the physical proof of that monumental change in strategy. It shows an invading force so confident in its hold on the land that it began to operate like a permanent population, laying the groundwork for the Danelaw, the vast territory in England that would be ruled by Norse law for generations. Why burn the grain? Perhaps a cooking fire got out of control, or a sudden attack forced the abandonment of a meal. Whatever the reason, that moment of misfortune centuries ago preserved a crucial clue, a tiny, carbonized seed that grows into a much larger truth about the ambitions of the most feared army to ever land on English shores. From shattered skulls and sacrificed companions to shimmering silk threads and a quiet Buddha from India, these 50 strange findings form a mosaic far richer than any single story could contain. They reveal the Viking Age not as a simple era of raids, but as a complex world of profound contrasts. These were a people who could engineer perfect geometric fortresses and perform life-saving brain surgery, yet also believe so deeply in their gods that they would consign fortunes of silver and gold to the depths of a lake. They were explorers who reached the sunny shores of North America and traders whose networks connected the frozen Arctic to the bustling markets of Baghdad. Their graves hold the bones of female military commanders and powerful seeresses wielding staffs of prophecy, challenging our most basic assumptions about their society. They were warriors who cherished strategic board games and farmers who buried their beloved cats. Each burial mound is a capsule of this breathtaking diversity, holding the pragmatic and the spiritual, the local and the global, all within the same circle of earth. The true legacy of the Vikings is this incredible complexity, a society of explorers, traders, warriors, and believers whose real story is far more compelling than the legend. We have walked through 50 of their most puzzling secrets, but the conversation does not end here. We would love to hear which of these discoveries reshaped your understanding the most. Was it the warrior woman of Birka, the peacock in a Norwegian king's ship, or the lonely bone inscribed with a plea for a kiss? Share the finding that captured your imagination in the comments